do anything, did not go to the police right away, felt, as Gacy had said, that in fact nobody would believe him.
In March 1968, the teenager finally broke down and revealed everything to his family. His parents pressed charges against Gacy, who was arrested and charged with sodomy.
Well, Gacy took the charges out there terribly. He was at first very, very vigilant in his protection of himself and his family. He was one of these, it was one-on-one. It wasn't me who did this. I wouldn't have done it. The kid's a liar.
Gacy was convinced he could outsmart his accusers and insisted he be given a lie detector test. He failed. Investigators even joked that the only truthful answer came when he was asked his name.
He felt that his world had crumbled. People would see him coming and they didn't want to be around him. And I think it drastically affected his personality.
During the investigation, other teenage boys came forward with allegations of sexual abuse. Gacy pleaded guilty to the sodomy charge, but insisted that 15-year-old Voorhees willingly engaged in oral sex with him.
This young individual made the charge at me. He claims that he was sexually abused by me, and in essence, he was blackmailing me for it. Now, what it boiled down to was oral copulation, and it was consensual.
The judge didn't see it that way and gave Gacy the maximum sentence, 10 years at the state penitentiary in Anamosa. He would never see his wife Marlene or his children again. Gacy arrived at the prison in December 1968.
It's like he accepted it, like I did the crime so I get the time. And I mean, he didn't say anything, but just, he didn't break down. Again, he didn't cry. He did not cry. We all cried, including my father.
Even behind bars, Gacy aggressively pursued all of the social outlets available to him. He not only made friends with fellow prisoners, but he mingled with the guards, social workers, and even the warden. Within 8 months, Gacy landed a job as head cook in the prison kitchen. He loved trying out new recipes for the inmates.
I can say unreservedly that the quality of the food improved dramatically. One thing John was a very, very, very fine cook. And he understood something that traditionally folks who cook in prisons don't understand. He understood the use of spices.
In December 1969, a TV film crew visited the prison to shoot a segment called Christmas at Anamosa. In this rare footage, the head cook spoke with pride about the meal he was preparing for his fellow inmates.
The men, with the exception of the turkey, which they get a generous proportion of, and the pumpkin pie that will be served, are allowed to take as much as they want to eat. The only requirement is that you eat what you take.
After his interview, Gacy joined the prison choir in singing a carol. But this holiday season would be John's worst. Back in Chicago, his father was battling cirrhosis of the liver. On Christmas morning, John Stanley Gacy died. The news devastated his son. He was convinced that his father died of shame over his sodomy conviction.
He felt like he stripped him of any dignity. He was remorseful about that, that he disappointed him in such a way that it killed him. And a lot of times we'd sit and we'd talk, and I'd say, John, you didn't. It was a disease. Dad's drinking is what created his death.
Gacy's grief quickly turned to rage, which he took out on inmates he suspected were gay. One afternoon while walking back to his cell, he spotted 2 prisoners having oral sex. Gacy kicked one of the men in the face, then returned to his cell.
There was someone who was struggling with an inner demon that did not have to do with hating homosexuals, but with being attracted to them. And John hated prison every day that he was there. After his father's death, a lot of hates, including that one, became much more powerful in his personality.
On June 18, 1970, prison officials released him on good behavior. He had served 16 months of his 10-year sentence. John returned to his hometown, Chicago, alone, and let his family there know that he was determined to start a new life. Gacy moved in with his recently widowed mother and got a job as a short-order cook. John worked hard and stashed away every penny he made.
It's like he couldn't rest. Something definitely was driving him. And his temperament was different. It's almost as if he had a little plan of action. He was going to be successful.
By June 1971, Gacy had saved enough money to start his own contracting company. He called it PDM, for painting, decorating, and maintenance. The following year, John and his mother bought this ranch house in Norwood Park on the outskirts of Chicago. By now, he had a steady girlfriend named Carol Hoff, who was recently divorced and on welfare. Gacy had known her since high school. John confided in Carol about his bisexuality and his prison record. She was naturally concerned, but tolerant. She saw her boyfriend as a hardworking, caring man her children loved. From the beginning of their courtship, her two daughters, Tammy and April, called him Daddy.
He loved the girls, and they loved him. There's no doubt about that. But his and Carol's relationship was that of a friendship as well as their love for one another.
Yet Carol's affection was not enough for Gacy. He could no longer control his hidden attraction to teenage boys. Something deep inside of him was about to snap. On January 2nd, 1972, Gacy picked up 16-year-old Tim McCoy at the Greyhound bus station. John offered to show the boy the sights, then lured him back to his house, where they engaged in sex. When they were done, Gacy grabbed a kitchen knife and plunged it into the teenager's chest. Then he buried the body in the crawl space under his house.
It was impulsive. He really hadn't planned on killing him. But I think that once he did make that move, it gave him the ultimate power trip.
Gacy was able to act as if nothing had happened. 7 months later, he and Carol were married. She and her daughters moved in with John. His mother moved out to give the newlyweds privacy. Soon after the wedding, John's relationship with his wife began to deteriorate. He still longed for sex with young men, wherever and whenever he could find it. On the night of July 31st, 1975, Gacy had the house to himself and invited over one of his young employees. 16-year-old John Butkovich had worked for Gacy for nearly a year. First, on the pretext of doing a magic trick, he coaxed the boy into slipping on a pair of handcuffs.
And he says, "What's the trick to this? I can't get these things off." And at that time, Gacy went in his pocket and grabbed the key to the handcuffs and says, "The trick is you have to have the key."
Then, with his victim gagged by his own underwear, the sexual torture began. Afterwards, Gacy looped a rope around the teenager's neck, then slid a stick between the knots.
It's in a tourniquet, so it cut off the air. So if you're going to kill somebody, you just put it on their neck and twist it 3 times or 4 times or whatever till the person stopped moving.
He removed the handcuffs and disposed of the body. Now Gacy had killed twice. His psychiatrists would come to believe that the motive could be traced to his abusive childhood.
There began to be a confusion between feeling better about himself in the sense of empowering himself to overcome this childhood sense of failure and his sexual desires and needs.
He liked handcuffs. He liked to hurt people. But he did it more in the sense of wanting to experiment to see how somebody would react.
Gacy's double life had taken shape. Family, friends, and business associates had no idea who the real John Wayne Gacy was. Not only was he a prosperous entrepreneur by day, but even entertained children in hospitals. He would dress up as a clown he called Pogo.
When I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool.
Gacy even dabbled in Cook County politics and was named a Democratic precinct captain.
He would help people. He would do favors for people. The old-fashioned precinct captain, if they needed something, a garbage can or something, he'd get it, a Christmas tree, he'd get it for them. If they needed construction work, he would do it, or have somebody do it for them. Everybody knew John Gacy, and he knew everybody in his precinct.
But Gacy's hectic schedule was taking its toll on his marriage. He had stopped having sex with his wife, Carol, and they bickered constantly. One afternoon in 1975, John berated Carol for spending too much money. After 3 years of marriage with him, she filed for divorce and soon left the house with her daughters. Now single again, the 33-year-old Gacy was like a wild beast uncaged. With no wife and children to look after, he resumed his hunt for young men. Gacy would abduct teenage boys, sometimes at gunpoint, and drive them back to his suburban house, where he would rape and kill them. But he was growing tired of digging holes in his crawl space. He wanted graves readily available. Gacy hired an unsuspecting employee, David Cram, to trench for piping and instructed him to break ground only in the areas he had marked.
He would lay out the trench. All right, this is where you dig, this is where you dig. Don't vary from the path. And there was also comments about the time factor. He'd come down, see how I was doing. How's it going? Are we done yet? You done being down there?
Cram also rented the spare bedroom in his boss's house. He returned home one night and found Gacy drunk and dressed in his clown costume. Gacy invited Cram to join him for a drink. The men had a few Mai Tais, then Gacy tricked Cram into the handcuffs.
And he's laughing, ha, 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 you know, just like a little kid. You know, and again, I'm standing there looking at a clown in a clown suit, laughing at me because I'm locked up. And he's like poking me. Does it bother you? Huh? Does that bother you? Huh? So I told him, I said, if you don't take these off, I'm going to kick your ass.
The teenager then saw a side of his boss that few ever lived to tell about.
It was just like a light switch went off in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a thought. He just starts growling like a mad dog.
Gacy lunged at Cram and swung him around the room, shouting, "I'm going to rape you." Despite the handcuffs, Cram was able to push Gacy to the ground. He somehow managed to grab the key and escape to his room. David Cram moved out. Others were not so lucky. By the end of 1977, Gacy had killed 19 young men in his home, all the while carefully maintaining his double life. In May 1978, he was back in the limelight, organizing the Polish Independence Day Parade in Chicago. The guest of honor was none other than First Lady Rosalind Carter. At a function that evening, the serial killer mingled just inches from the president's wife. By December, Gacy was committing a murder every 2 or 3 weeks. He showed no signs of stopping until an investigation into a missing youth would lead police to Gacy's front door. By 1978, 36-year-old John Wayne Gacy had sexually tortured and killed 32 young men. He had not only managed to cover up his crimes, but to keep up his status as a businessman and community leader in Chicago. On December 11th, Gacy met with a client of his contracting company at the Nissan pharmacy in suburban Des Plaines. Gacy was bidding on a remodeling job. Around closing time, he abducted 15-year-old Rob Peast, who worked at the drugstore. Gacy had lured him into the car with the promise of a better-paying job with his company. The teenager was never seen alive again. He became Gacy's 33rd victim. The next day, after witnesses at the pharmacy said Peast was last seen with Gacy, police questioned him about the boy's disappearance.
He would say, "I was in the drugstore, but I never saw him. You got the wrong guy." It was always, "I'll cooperate." He had gotten away with so much before that he thought he was so smooth that he'd get away with this one just